we traveled up to Capitol Hill to hear from congressmen and women to get their thoughts on the DC-5. It's been 2 years since progressive anti-abortion uprising Lauren Handy's gruesome discovery of the 5 babies in a box. And to date, there have been no conclusions drawn or arrests made in conjunction with the DC-5. So what is going on? What actions, if any, has Congress taken to uncover the truth of the DC-5's untimely demise? And how will they continue to apply pressure to the DC mayor, police, medical examiner, and the Department of Justice to do their jobs and to make sure that the 5 children who were dead and found in a box are autopsied and that this investigation is complete? From Exposed, Abortion in America, the DC-5, this is Episode 4, Enacting Justice for the 5. Let's listen in as Representative Keith Self shares from the House floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak on a very heavy subject. And with me, I have images of a very disturbing and graphic nature. I want to show the violent, horrific reality of abortion. And this should shock every American. What would you do if you found the dead bodies of 5 babies inside a cardboard box? Would you call the police? Would you throw the box out? Or would you let it be taken away to a medical waste incinerator and forget you ever found it? This is not a hypothetical. This is exactly what happened right here in this city, just 3 miles from this House chamber. As these images show, their bodies were disfigured, crushed, chemically burned. One baby girl bore wounds, a deep laceration to the back of her neck that likely indicates an illegal partial birth abortion. Another baby girl had the marks of a D&E abortion, dilation and evacuation, in which the abortionist dismembers the baby limb by limb and crushes its skull to remove it from the womb. This occurred nearly 2 years ago. Yet shamefully, neither the Department of Justice, nor the D.C. Metropolitan Police, nor the D.C. Medical Examiner did anything. No autopsies were done, no investigations were opened, and the entire case of the DC-5 was swept under the rug. Something is very sick in our society. When a baby at 30 weeks in utero is wanted, a doctor will do anything to save its life. But when a baby is unwanted, the abortionist takes its life. When a mother miscarries, we mourn with her for the loss of her unborn child. But when she gets an abortion, we are told there's nothing to mourn, there's nothing to see, these aren't human beings, these aren't real babies, they are only medical waste. Move along. Don't be bothered. Don't open the cardboard box. Lauren and Teresa opened the box. They recognized the dignity and inherent value of all human life, even babies still in the womb. 5 days after discovering the box, Lauren was arrested on charges of protesting outside an abortion clinic. Today, she is still detained and could face 11 years in prison. What has gone wrong in our country that a woman who found these babies is imprisoned, while the man who killed them, notorious late-term abortionist Dr. Santangelo, goes free? The District of Columbia allows abortion up to including the moment of birth. In other words, in this city, a baby's right to life depends on which side of the birth canal it is on. The DC-5 were children, human beings with distinct DNA weeks from birth before their lives were brutally and barbarically snuffed out. The DOJ must immediately investigate the likely violation of the partial birth abortion ban. I demand the D.C. medical examiner allow an autopsy. And I stand with my House colleagues in calling for Congress to investigate. Justice for the DC-5 demands no less. And I yield back.
We also caught up with Representative Chip Roy following a press conference he led with other members and the progressive anti-abortion uprising.
Why are you demanding justice for the 5?
Well, I mean, look, these are our precious lives. So I would start with that, right? Like, put aside the law for a minute. These are our individual lives that deserve respect, especially as we seem to understand the lateness at which the abortions appear to have occurred. Of course, we don't have all the medical information. We're trying to push for that. And this is trying to set a standard going forward so that we can respect life throughout life's existence and make sure that we're following then, the second part of this is following the law. We believe laws were violated here. And then that relates directly to the FACE Act, right? And the extent to which we now have Americans who are trying to call this kind of stuff out, and they're showing up and they're trying to exercise their free speech rights and exercise their right to assemble and go, explore these kinds of things. And they're the ones being persecuted and end up being prosecuted and end up in jail. That's unconscionable. So these things are all interrelated. So we've got to advance this to use those 5 and memorialize their lives in order to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't happen in the future.
Thank you so much, Congressman Roy.
Thank you.
At the press conference, Representative Chip Roy told Mary Margaret Olahan of the Daily Signal that they're trying to cast a light and shame D.C. officials and the DOJ to do what's right by the DC-5, to do an autopsy, and to conduct and finish an investigation. And why is Congress able to do this? Well, Representative Roy reminded everyone that Congress has jurisdiction of Washington, D.C., and that they need to exercise that jurisdiction. Also at the press conference, a brand new mom, Representative Anna Paulina Luna, shared her unique perspective on the DC-5 babies.
Especially as a new mother, to understand that this individual performed an abortion to where if this was in a hospital, this child would have essentially lived, that one of the children was actually suffocated in their own amniotic fluid. It's inhumane. We have certain practices in this country, and to cause and inflict pain like that is something that I don't think anyone standing in this crowd can get behind. So we ask for your help. Please help us find a medical examiner to conduct these autopsies and proper burial.
But it's not just the House that's speaking into this. GOP senators are lending their voice and action to discover the truth of the DC-5. We caught up with Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma.
Senator James Lankford, thank you for being here. But I'm very curious, what was your initial reaction to the discovery of the 5?
In many ways, for me, it was absolute shock, as it was for anyone else who values the life of any child. To think that we are still in a situation as a nation, that there are places where it is obvious these partial birth abortions are still occurring. We've got children fully developed that are being thrown away as medical waste. It is painful. It is a message about our culture, and it is a continual push to say the work is far from done. So many people have backed up and have said, Roe v. Wade was overturned in the Dobbs decision, so the work is done. And I've smiled at people and said, no, we're just getting started. We're at the end of the first quarter on this. There's still a cultural conversation about the value of every child, and that discovery was just another moment of awakening for hopefully millions of people to say this work is undone.
You hit on something really important there, and we say this at SBA too, which is the Dobbs decision just gave us a seat at the table. I mean, we finally have that seat, and then you look at a situation like the DC-5, and it's just horrifying what, these are the faces of the euphemism of reproductive freedom, sadly and unfortunately. Why is this story important for your fellow men and women in Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think it's important because, again, it reminds people that there's still a lot of work to be done, and we've got brutal deaths that are happening to children around the country, even right here in the nation's capital. But I think it's important as well for anyone who just values the life of a child, and for those folks that are kind of sitting on the fence saying, well, I'm supportive of abortion early, but I don't like it late. I think it reminds them that really where a lot of my Democrat colleagues are is they want abortion at any moment, at any time, right up till the time of birth, regardless of how it's actually done. And that is not where Americans are. Now, I'm very supportive. I believe a child is a child at conception. When that child is now developing, that is a person that's there. They have unique DNA that is distinctly different than any other person on earth at the point of conception and their growth. But for many people that struggle with that, they'll say, well, they're a child later on, and I'll look at the 5 and I'll say, well, what about that child? And I think it just reminds them how horrific the stand is to be able to have abortion at any moment, at any time during development, and what that really looks like. And for Lauren Handy and for all the folks that continue to be able to face persecution just because they think children are valuable, it reminds us where our culture really is.
Yeah, and Senator, one of the things that is baffling to me is that most Americans don't know about this story. I can only imagine if this was another story that was a more convenient narrative for the other side, this would be everywhere. Why do you think Americans haven't heard about this story?
Because the left wants everyone to just look away. They want to say, don't notice these things. Go on to something else. Go watch a TikTok video. Go do something else, but don't notice that children are being destroyed right up to the moment of birth. And what Lauren did was an exceptionally compassionate event to be able to say, let me take care of these children and have a humane treatment, to be able to know about her discovery of all of these children that were literally at moments of birth, or what's very obvious, a partial birth abortion. Reminds us again of Kermit Gosnell in Philadelphia from years ago, and other events where the nation was horrified by it. But in this time, under this president and under this culture where we are right now, instead of being horrified by it like the nation was under Kermit Gosnell years ago, now the nation has just become immune to it, to say, oh, it's just children, it's just an abortion, it's just reproductive freedom. Look away. And we shouldn't look away. We should actually pause and go, is this really where we are as a nation? A nation is judged based on how they treat the most vulnerable in their country, and there are no more vulnerable people than those children in the womb.
And Senator, I want to get your thoughts on this, because you've got this situation with the DC-5, and it happened right in DC. I mean, right in our nation's capital. We know that there are 7 states in this country with, for any reason, at any time, you can get an abortion, not just in emergency cases, but for any reason. So what do you think about the Biden-Harris administration touring the country, pushing late-term abortions when they've got the DC-5 that happened right in the shadow of the White House?
Yeah, it is. Actually, what's painful is federal law prohibits partial birth abortion. This is a clear violation of federal law that the Department of Justice is just choosing not to investigate and is saying, just look away. We're not going to follow through on something that's clear out there as evidence. At the same time, the Department of Justice is going after anyone who prays on the sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic, or for individuals that disagree with increasing abortion. And we've seen over and over again facilities that are for pregnancy resource centers and other church-owned facilities that are supporting women that want to keep their children. When they're vandalized, when they're attacked, the Department of Justice is looking away at those and saying, well, those aren't serious, those aren't real. So it's this bizarre side-by-side where the first days of this administration, of the Biden administration, a nurse who was compelled against her will, against her conscience, and against the agreement of her own hospital to participate in abortion, she had a case for conscience protections. Under the first days of this administration, the administration dropped it and said, we're not going to prosecute the hospital for violating her conscience because we agree with the hospital, so that nurse's conscience doesn't count. Well, That's not federal law. Federal law says those individuals should be protected. So it's this double standard that's sitting out there that I think Americans need to be able to see, that when a child, their life is taken, obviously by a partial birth abortion in violation of federal law, this administration, this Department of Justice chooses, I'm not going to actually enforce the law, I'm going to look away. When it's a pregnancy resource center that's being attacked, they choose to be able to look away and to say that's not significant because I disagree with what they're doing. That's not equal justice under the law, and that is a real issue that Americans should pause and think about, regardless of their opinions about abortion. Americans should pause and think about equal justice under the law, but we should always stand for the protection of children, regardless of how small they are. This administration has moved from being quote-unquote pro-choice to being pro-abortion and to try to increase the number of abortions in America. They are the most pro-abortion administration our nation has ever seen, where they're fighting not to just protect abortion, but to increase abortion. And it is for us, all of us that value the lives of children, we ask the most simple question: why do you think some children are disposable and some children are valuable? We believe every child is valuable. Every child is precious. We don't look at one child and say, no, you're medical waste, and another child and say, you're precious. We look at every single child in every place and say, that child is precious and should be protected and should have an opportunity for life, the same as opportunity as everyone else does. It's the most basic thing. The only difference between a child in the womb and the child outside the womb is time. I'm 40 weeks older than I was 40 weeks ago. That child at delivery is just 40 weeks older than they were before. So we should continue to be able to do what we can to be able to speak out and stand up for the value of every single child.
Senator, why are you demanding justice for the 5?
Because someone needs to speak out for those who cannot speak for themselves. Someone needs to speak out and to say, when it's a clear violation of law, why do we look away as a nation of law to say that we're going to ignore the law? We need to continue to be able to speak out. What has occurred here, everyone that wants to be able to pause for a moment to be able to look and see can see there is a major issue here. So I've spoken out often on this. I sent a letter literally within days of the initial discovery there to be able to send them out to the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, to be able to challenge, hey, we need to be able to protect these children and to be able to have an autopsy and an investigation. This looks like a crime has occurred with a partial birth abortion on it. I joined other senators in a letter to Merrick Garland to be able to push this out. I actually held a group of D.C. judges and would not allow them to be able to go through the Senate until I had direct phone conversation with the mayor of D.C. to be able to talk about this directly and to demand that they not only protect those children there, but they actually do the investigation. And then just as recently, I've actually sent a letter to the chief medical examiner of Washington, D.C., demanding some information because there was a report they were about to destroy those bodies, but they still have not investigated the death. They have the bodies still, but they weren't going to do any autopsy on them. They weren't going to do an evaluation. So I found out about that, contacted the medical examiner. They've now held the bodies and have not destroyed them. So there's a lot that still needs to be done, but we're going to continue to say America is not just looking away from this as the leadership of Washington, D.C. wants us to, as the left wants us to. But just like under Kermit Gosnell in Philadelphia more than a decade ago, we're going to look at this and to say this is something that needs to be investigated and we need to be able to take on as a serious crime.
Absolutely. And there's already so much action that has happened, but as you know, it takes a lot of pressure just to get either the media to report or for the medical examiner or for everyone to take the actions needed to bring justice to the 5. What, in your opinion, are next steps? What can Congress do?
Next steps is continue to be able to shine the light on the medical examiner, on the Department of Justice, on the mayor's office, and to demand the investigation there that should occur, and then demand justice for those 5. If this was a crime, which it seemed obvious on its face that it was, based on how the bodies were actually destroyed, then we need to make sure that we actually get justice for them in the days ahead. So this is just continuing the conversation, quite frankly, what you're doing right now, to continue to ask questions, to be able to put it out in public so that people don't lose track of it, for us to continue to be able to write letters, make phone calls, continue to let people know that we've not just dropped this in the chaos of a million other issues that are out there in our nation, and there are a lot of important issues, to let people know we also haven't forgotten about this one.
Absolutely. And then finally, Senator, what is your message to your colleagues across the aisle on this?
Oh, it has been my message to them over and over again, as I've spoken often on the Senate floor and had many conversations off the floor and in private conversations with other senators that disagree with this, and so many Democrat senators that I sit down with, and to be able to have a personal dialogue with and talk about the value of every single child. I come back to them from a very optimistic tone to say, hey, I believe every child is valuable. I don't think any child is disposable. I look at two women walking down the same street on opposite sides of the road. One is walking to an abortion clinic to take the life of her child, and the other one is walking to her workplace to have a baby shower. Both of those children are at the same moment of gestation. One of them is being celebrated with gifts, and the other one is being destroyed and thrown away. What's the difference between those two children? And the clear answer is there is no difference between those two children. Those are both children. And the simple acknowledgement of that child at that stage of development is just like every other child at that stage of development. They're valuable and precious, and we need to continue to be able to speak out. And for all those folks that say that they are personally opposed to abortion, but they just don't want to impose their values on other people, which, by the way, I hear often from many of my colleagues, I come back to them and say, well, I'm personally opposed to robbery and theft, but do you mind if I come into your office and take everything that I want? And they'll typically laugh and go, no, I don't want you to come into my office and take everything you want. And I go, well, that's because you think there's a justice issue there. So to say that you're personally opposed to the taking of the life of children, but you're not going to actually speak out for other children, means you're just being silent on something that we all know is an injustice. So let's speak out for what we know is right and stand up for that as a nation.
All right. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, thank you so much, and really appreciate you lending your voice to this.
Well, glad to be able to do it. Thanks for continuing to be able to set this in front of the American people and to continue to equip people to be able to have true, grace-filled, truth-filled conversations with people.
Whether it's the House or Senate, Republican or Democrat, one thing is for certain. Everyone has a vested interest in understanding what happened to those 5 children found in a box in the shadow of the White House. Sadly, without action and pressure, it appears the D.C. mayor, police, and DOJ will not be bringing about peaceful resolution to this case anytime soon. Join us for our next episode as we explore the legal implications of this case, on why there were damning indicators of federal abortion crimes and what that means for this case moving forward. From Exposed, Abortion in America, the DC-5, this is Episode 4, Enacting Justice for the 5. Time is critical as the bodies of these children, the DC-5, could be sent to the incinerator any day. If you, like us, want an investigation and an autopsy done to confirm the truth of the children's untimely death, please contact D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser and the D.C. Chief of Police. Tell them you demand justice and for them to not destroy the bodies of the DC-5 babies.